Hello, and welcome to Journey to SEA 2025. This is Shellyan Edwards Barron, your creative writing specialist here to talk about narratives, reports, and comprehension to help you on your journey so that you can fully understand how to work with your child or your students to give them the best opportunity to do well at SEA. And this series, we're working toward 2025. Now, I'm laughing so much for two reasons. One, I was really careful this morning when I was doing up the notes, and it took me a little longer with the notes because I had to make some choices. Today, we're talking about climax, and climax is like one of the most misunderstood aspects of narrative writing. And recently, I've been hearing a lot about some of those misconceptions. So, there's a lot I really want to clarify for you today. I kind of ran late, and in preparation, I still somehow left episode 8 on the intro, and it's supposed to be episode 9 today. We're actually 9 weeks in. Imagine that. And if you've been following, you know what we've covered so far. If you've not been following, if this is your first session, then please make sure get a copy of the schedules. There are schedules for reports, narratives, and the comprehension so that you know what we're covering each week and you can prepare ahead or you can go back and review as needed. And of course, if the sessions are helpful to you and you find them useful, be sure to like and subscribe. I have a YouTube channel. It's being streamed on YouTube. If you're looking at it on YouTube, thank you so much. If you're looking at it on the Facebook page with Coach Youth, thank you for being here as well. And you, of course, you can like and share the links as well so that everyone around you, other parents, other teachers, can get the benefit of the information. If you have any questions that I haven't answered when I touch on a topic, feel free to message me. The more questions I get is the more I know what to really focus on during the lives so that I can help you the best that I can within the time that we have. So, today, yeah, I had to, kind of reel myself in when it comes to the climax, because it's something that I feel very strongly about simply because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And the misinformation is really subtle and it appears to be right, but then it takes a wrong turn. And so it can really be confusing. But once it's clarified and students know exactly what they're working on, it gets a lot easier to work with. So, all right. So now, as usual, we deal with reports first so that I want to get into the reports and then get to the climax. With report writing, let me share my screen so you know where we are and what we're doing today. Right. So, yes. So we are on episode 9. And today we're looking just quickly at using indirect speech. We did a lot about what indirect speech is, what it looks like, getting the wording and the punctuation and all those things clear. So that's what we did last week and week before. So if you haven't seen those episodes, definitely go back to them. That's episode 7 and 8, because this week is just a quick recap and recommendations of what you can do to continue studying them this week with the reported speech. Sometimes it's called that. I call it reported speech a lot, but I put indirect speech on this header so that I'd remember which one it is as well. So with the indirect speech, and then we have understanding climax. We are probably going to spend the bulk of this episode on that because of how nuanced and how fine-tuned the details are. And I am going to be sharing with you some of the misconceptions that I've heard, and I'll be clarifying that to make sure you get it clear. Because climax is the most important, one of, certainly, I consider it like the most important part of an exciting story is what really sort of wraps up the story effectively. And so if students don't get that, they can still, I guess, gain a fair amount of marks, but their story will be missing something. And if a student is doing so well, you don't want their story to be missing anything. And so that's why we're looking at Climax. Now, we will probably spend, like I said, the majority of this session talking about Climax. And next week, we will touch on it again because I think it really is that important. Now, next week, we'll be talking about the falling action, which is the reaction to Climax. And of course, we will revisit Climax as we speak about that. And finally, we're looking at fiction answers. Again, because we'll be spending the bulk of the episode on Climax, this would be just a quick review because we've already spent two episodes on fiction writing as well and fiction understanding fiction comprehension, the background. We've looked at what fiction is and what makes it unique, the types of questions that you would get. And we also looked at the questions, what the fiction questions can look like and what's their main focus. If you've missed those episodes, go back, that would be 7 and 8. Go back and review those episodes carefully because they really do lay the foundation. So, in today's episode, the main focus is going to be climax because that's the new concept that we are really engaging with for narratives. But for reports and the comprehension, we're doing a quick review. So, let's get started with it. Now, we're looking at practicing indirect speech. And so we know that indirect speech is really reporting what others say because in a report, people interact and people say things. And so having students know how to write what other people say, it's extremely important in the concept of making the report as formal as possible, but adding in the effective details. So let's do just a quick review on that. Now, remember, we have the different types of reports, and the different types of reports mean that we would have different situations happening, different contexts. And so, if you've been following the series, then at this point, working with your child, you should already have done a couple exercises about identifying what participants might say in one or two of the different situations that you could encounter for a particular kind of report. So for example, incident reports can cover things like bullying, situations where participants deliberately do things like fighting. You can also cover topics like vandalism and so on. These are topics that come under incidents, and so it's a good idea. If you haven't done it yet, then this is definitely something to do. Work with your child in understanding what kinds of conversations would happen in situations like that. What would people say? And you should also do that for accidents. What type of accidents can you encounter? Generally, there are accidents where students are playing and somebody got injured, or they're doing an activity and there's some damage to property, or there sometimes students have vehicular accidents to write about in their practice tests when they do the practice tests and they mock exams. Sometimes they encounter vehicular accidents. So you really have, like, I would say three: the damage to property, injury to person, or the vehicular accident can be a combination of all three, of all two. The well, both of them, the damage, and because the cars colliding, damage to property, and then people can get injured during the accident. So what kind of conversations would people have in those situations? What would teachers say? What would students say? How would teachers respond to the situation in terms of what they would say? And how would students respond in terms of what they would say? So we're going through all of those, and hopefully you may have done it already. If not, definitely go through. So we have activities, competitions, events. Think about what people would say in the different contexts and make notes. and then practice putting them in reported speech. Now, of course, if you want worksheets, I do have in my textbook, this is the investigating facts textbook, and there's a journal that goes with this, and uh, so the journal and the workbook, they all have activities. So when it comes to the reported speech, that would be in lesson, I'll tell you the exact one. Connecting ideas. Okay, so I think that would probably be lesson 5. Yep, it's in lesson 5. And at the end of that lesson 5, and of course, there's a lovely activity for students to do to really help them feel engaged while learning about the reports. There is a worksheet where students are converting the direct speech to indirect speech. Um, and so there are 7 questions, and then of course at the end of the book the answers are there, so that, well, recommended answers, so that students can double check. And so there's a explanation, activity, and one worksheet in the text, but then of course the text comes as a combination with the journal and the workbook. The workbook has 3 additional practice activities for working on reported speech, and the journal has some extension activities that go through a guided process of just what I was explaining to you about brainstorming. So there's a prompt, and then you brainstorm, okay, in this kind of situation, in an incident report, what would the participants say to each other? Brainstorm that, write it down, and then convert some of that into the reported speech. So you get practice with, it's a complete practice with working on reported speech. All right. And so at this point, we're dealing with just really practicing the reported speech. And I wanted to share with you as well. Where are my notes? Yeah. This year I'm doing things a little bit differently in terms of my vacation programs. And so the vacation programs that I'm doing, I've decided to take some time in July to focus on creating more materials, because and updating the materials that I have. And so I've decided to work on my to offer my courses in August instead. And so I'm doing 3 weeks in August, and this is the report writing flyer. I'm going to be sharing it later on this week, but I just wanted to let you know, because you see that textbook that I showed you just now, guess what? It's included in the program. So if you want a copy of the textbook, and you want to get the information, you're going to get in that program a copy of the textbook, the workbook, and the journal. And that's what we will be focusing on using during the program, during the 3 weeks. And of course, you will have it. And then in addition to that, I'm creating a new package of 5 reports. So one incident, one accident, one competition, one activity, and one event. It's a new package with 5 reports, 5 sample reports, and that's going to also be included in the program. So the cost is $900. We're doing 3 weeks. The time, it'll be in the morning. It's a 2 hour program. That would be the 2 hour live interaction with me. We'll be doing some of the experiments from in the text. We would also be doing the activities and practicing lots of fun stuff. It is all online, which I think is the most convenient, because then you have all your stuff at home. You don't have to travel anywhere, that kind of thing. And we still get to have a lot of fun when we're interacting. So it'll be 10 to 12. Now, of course, it could be longer, but here's the thing: you have the workbook, you have the textbook, you have the journal. And so you would the students, after we go through all the fun stuff and I give the explanation and we practice it and I answer their questions, then they have the workbook and the textbook and the journal to review and to continue their learning outside of class. And in addition to having it being that interactive and having all of that information in terms of the materials, the sessions are recorded. And this is one of the better benefits of online. I mean, one of the best ones, because we do have a few benefits of doing online programs. But I think this is one of the best ones because what that means is that not only do you get the benefit of the materials, you also get the benefit of clicking a link and reviewing the recording at any time to double check and to remind yourself of what was done and to get the direct explanation from me. So that is what, and it's going from August 5th to the 22nd. Registration will be open from tomorrow, but I'm sharing it with you. You can WhatsApp me 717-4993 if you want to get that. And of course, the delivery of the textbooks and the materials, all of that is included in the cost. So you pay one cost for everything, one cost for the materials, one cost for the one cost including materials, live sessions, and recordings, complete package. So you do this, and then students are going to be well prepared heading into September when they're going into their classes. So it's ideal for students who are going into Standard 5 who don't have a foundation in report writing, and for students who are in Standard 3 now and they're going into Standard 4 in September, you want to give them that head start with the report writing. So just letting you know about that program. And so for this week, you're practicing the report writing and the reported speech, indirect speech. And so you're reviewing all of these things, what it is. We've done that before, so you should have notes already with that. And then you're looking at using some of the notes that were taken after you've brainstormed about, okay, what could people say? How would they say it, etc. You're using that information to now write a report, practice writing a paragraph or two in a report. If you can write the whole thing, if the student can write the whole thing at this point, that's amazing. Have them practice it, but you're not looking at the like everything in the report. Whatever practice you're doing at this point, you're specifically looking at how the student is able to integrate what participants said during the situation. How are students able to integrate that into the report within a paragraph? All right, and that's the focus for this week. So that's it for the reports. And now we are going to the narratives. So I'm going to have to pause here for dramatic effect. It's narratives, of course. But in today's program, we're talking about climax. And I have to measure my words and my speech when I talk about climax because I get excited. I get kind of animated, and I might actually get to the point where I might say things that um, I should probably consider. And the reason I'm kind of measuring my words is because climax, what it is, and how it's used in a story is fairly simple when you get how it fits into the story. But there's a lot of misinformation that's going around that suggests alternatives to what climax actually is. And what happens is that students are misunderstanding what climax is. And because of that, their stories aren't developing effectively and they can't write complete stories. And climax is absolutely important for a complete story, for the story to make sense. And so it is a real pivotal point, a very important point in a story. So I'll give you my version of it, and then I'm going to actually show you. So I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I am actually going to show you three online sources and where the information comes from. You can check. Um, if you want the links, well, you'll see the links when I put it up so that you can do your own search and so on, just to double check and verify. And I'm doing this because I want you to understand that what I'm sharing about Climax is not what I think Climax is generally, but it is how Climax works, how Climax is outlined by many people who teach story writing and storytelling. And this is not just for the primary school level, this is Climax in writing for different levels as well. If you're writing a novel, you need to understand Climax, and it's the same climax that I'm going to be talking to you about today. So I'm going to be sharing three resources just to confirm that this is not unique to me. It's not only my idea. I'm not making it up. And I feel the need to do that because I know my approach to teaching writing is a little bit different. And sometimes because of that, people can say, well, okay, I'm seeing it in a textbook in primary school. I'm seeing it in a textbook, and therefore that has to be the correct thing. But it's not working the way it should for several reasons, and I'll explain. So let's start with just the general understanding of what climax is. So, climax is the turning point in the story. And for it to be the turning point in the story, it means that the story has to be heading somewhere, right? And this is why I did the 12-point plot breakdown from since the beginning, because in order to understand a lot of these things and how they work in a story, students need to understand the overall plot concept. So in a story, the main character wants something, or they're going after some particular goal or desire. And as they go through that process, they will encounter obstacles that would kind of block them, stop them from getting and achieving their goal. Now, that's where the rising action comes in, right? So, rising action is all about the conflict that is interfering with the main character and giving them some trouble. And then we have, well, of course, that has to come to a peak because we're rising, it's going up, it's getting more intense. But then something happens to change that. And at that point, we begin falling action because that's when it's like where we're blowing a balloon and the tension is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, it pops. And that means, excuse me, and that means it's not getting bigger any longer. It's exploded, and we're looking for the pieces falling to the ground and all of that. That would be falling action, and then conclusion, resolution after that. All right. And so most people understand that climax is the turning point of the story, but then they don't understand what it means to be the turning point and why it's the turning point, especially since we have falling action and resolution coming afterward. Many people think about the climax as like encountering the biggest problem. So I'm sure if you've been following this series, you've heard me say this before, that I've heard many people say that the climax is when the main character encounters the biggest problem. And then beyond that, they believe that if you encounter the biggest problem in climax, then falling action would be solving the biggest problem, and then the resolution would be that whole process after the problem is solved, and then we have the conclusion of the story. That is kind of mixed up, and it is primarily because in some literature discussions, and if you do a general search online, you may find some people saying, well, hey, the climax is the when things turn, and then falling action, we resolve things. Well, falling action leads to the resolution, and the resolution is when things are resolved. But what exactly are we resolving in the resolution, and how is that related to the falling action and the climax? So here's the thing. Now, what you're seeing on screen is just a simple illustration of where the climax falls in the story. We think of it as, plot mountain, rising action going up and falling action coming down. And we know that the climax is the peak, right? But then visualizing it like this with actual movement, I think will help you understand a little bit differently about what climax is and how it works. So, the climax in the story is that turning point at when things change for the character. What changes? And that's the main question to answer. What actually changes at that point of climax to allow for falling action to begin? So, in extensive pieces of literature, the climax can be anything from, the character doing something that changes the whole outlook, or the character crossing that point of being unable to turn back. And when we're looking at extensive literary works, and we have like several chapters to work with and so on, it's a little more challenging to find the climax and to understand how it works. But remember, in this SEA style writing that students are dealing with, it's a very simple story that they're working with. We have what is called, in literary context, we say an inciting incident. That's when the problems begin. In the 12-point plot diagram, I call it just a complication, because that's when things begin to get complicated for the main character. That's another way to say it. And then we have the conflict increasing in tension and things building, rolling after that. And I recommend just 3 points that will show and effectively demonstrate that rising action. And then we have a response to those things, to the conflict. And then something happens where the main character kind of, they feel hopeless, but then they get some hope and encouragement to face the biggest problem in the story. And so the climax, really what creates that turning point in the level of story that children are writing for SEA, what creates that turning point is when the character faces their problem, because things don't change for the character until they face the problem. So even though the intervention, which is what I call that point where they get help, even though they get help, and that kind of begins the process, that's like the bridge between the problem and facing it. We get a little idea of, okay, what can I do to solve this problem? What can I do to face this thing? We get a little help for that. But the real changing point and the real turning point happens when they face the problem, and either they win or they lose. Now, of course, we like stories where the hero wins, but the hero doesn't always win. Sometimes the hero loses, and they end up, with negative consequences. But whatever, whether they win or they lose, the process of facing the problem, That is what creates the turning point. And so if you think of the concept of falling action as, the main character kind of exhaling, or, I guess being deflated. That's the example with the balloon, with the tension growing, and then it pops at the climax, and then things start to, settle down. Then ask yourself this question: what are we settling down for? What are we relaxing or, exhaling about if the problem has not yet been solved? And so that's what I want you to think about. Now, of course, we're focusing especially on a very short story that has very clear sections to allow the characters to be developed quickly and to go through the whole paces of the plot quickly and so on, so that we can identify these things, right? And so ask yourself the question: if I'm still battling the problem, or I have not resolved anything, what exactly what exactly is falling? Because the whole point of and the concept of falling action is that things are settling, right? And so in order to get that, and in order to get to the conclusion, and to we think of resolution as a concept in terms of tying up loose ends and different things, we think about the climax as that major turning point. Now, if the character only has this one major problem, then the turning point of that story is when they solve that problem. All right? So I hope you understand what I'm saying and why climax cannot be when you first encounter the problem. Something has to happen in the climax that makes a change for the character, that reduces the tension. And if I still have the problem after meeting the climax, then technically there should still be rising action, because I'm still having to face this problem. And having to face the problem is going to give me some feelings and some emotions and some anxiety, and tension is still going to be high. So, in order for there to be falling action and for tension to be relaxed, I have to have dealt with something, and I have to have dealt with that problem. So, let me show you the other definitions of climax that I located. I'm showing you straight from the internet, not with my own words, so that you'd be able to see exactly where it came from and so on. Let's see, where are we? We are here. All right. So this is from a website named Story Flint, and it's a website where if you want to write a excuse me, if you want to write a book and you are looking for assistance and guidance, you can go here. There are lots of different templates, some free set templates and some that you paid for, different articles, and lots of training and stuff happening here. And this is how they define climax: the dramatic turning point of the story when the conflict is resolved and the main character reaches their goal. All right? So it's the dramatic turning point of the story, which adds to the idea that the climax really should be dramatic, right? Especially in the kinds of stories that students have to write for SEA, it is that dramatic turning point. Oh, excuse me. So that's one. The other one is, this website is Literary Terms, and it's just pretty much a website that has a list of literary terms. This one actually has some examples as well, so I want to go through that. It gives a pretty, I guess, detailed explanation of what climax is, even referring to where the root of the word, where it came from. So this one says, climax is the highest point of tension or drama in a narrative plot, right? Often, climax is also when the main problem of the story is faced and solved by the main character or protagonist. The phrase climax is derived from the Greek word climax, I guess is how you pronounce it, meaning ladder. Reading a story is like climbing a ladder with the climax at the top. The basic elements of plots, and well, of course, we have exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. The story is tied up and concluded. So the resolution is the ending of the story, because even after you solve the main problem, there will still be some lingering details. So for example, let's just say the biggest problem is a monster that the hero has to fight. After the hero fights and kills the monster, that's not, everything is not going to automatically click and go back to normal. Yes, there is some, reaction in terms of there's a release, there's some relief, there's the falling action, but there is still cleanup. What do we do? How do we protect ourselves from the monster coming again, or another monster coming? What happens after that? So there's some stuff, there are details that would come after that. So I understand that we do have to write some more after the climax, but I really want you to pay attention to what the climax is and what comes after. So, after the climax, the story begins to slow down, showing the results of the climax. And so, if it is we're having results of the climax actually has to be that facing of the problem. There's a big difference with encountering the biggest problem and facing it. And I think that is where some of the confusion comes in. We could meet the problem, but when we meet that biggest problem, we don't immediately jump into action and deal with it and face it. It is not quite that simple when developing the story, because what happens is that when you meet the biggest problem, the character has to feel a type of way. I mean, you are going about your business, things are, you're on this quest to find, let's say you're looking for treasure, and you're on this quest to find the treasure, and you're getting closer, and each time you have to do some riddle or something, and then you reach to the point where the treasure is in sight, but then this monster appears. Do you immediately rush in and, oh, there's a monster, I'm going to kill it and get this treasure? The problem that the character faces that creates the opportunity for climax has to be such a big problem that the character can't just rush in and deal with it. It's not the kind of problem that would just be, hey, I'm gonna, you know, squash this bug. It's not gonna be that simple. It is going to be the kind of problem that is difficult to face, difficult to process, and it is going to shock the main character. And so the main character facing these immense obstacles, or this particular immense obstacle, the first reaction is not, oh, it's another problem, I'm going to deal with this. No. Their first reaction is going to be, what the heck is this? How am I going to face this? That is the immediate reaction if the problem is strong enough. And so once the problem is strong enough and we have that reaction, we do need to spend a little time on the reaction. And that's why we don't just rush into the climax. And that's why it might feel like, okay, the climax and the problem, there's a little distance between it. Simply because the character has to feel some stuff, they have to think about what's going on, they have to really kind of understand it, and then they figure out how to tackle it, and then they tackle it. And tackling it, that facing of the problem, is where we get climax because that's when things are going to change. If we win, we ride off into the sunset after we dig up our treasure. If we lose the treasure forever, and then we end up in distress. Woe is me. I coulda, woulda, shoulda. You know what? Next time. Um, something major changes for the main character. That is what the climax is. So then let's look at the example for climax here. Um, Story about a mother and daughter. So this one deals with the relationship, right? So the mother and daughter are upset with each other. So the main character would be the mother, would be the daughter, sorry, and the mother is another important character in the story, but we want to tell the story from one character's point of view. So we're telling from the daughter's point of view. That's why it says a character and her mother. Now, the main character believes she must be an artist, whereas her mother does not support her career and would rather have her be an accountant. So the main character is going after her dream of being an artist. And so, going after her dream to be an artist, she might have had to, find another job first to accumulate funds to join art school or to get materials. That's conflict because she has to work hard and get things. So she doesn't have any money. She has to find the money to do certain things. And then when she finds the money, she has to go through some processes and do things. It's not that simple. And then when she finally thinks, okay, I have everything I need, I'm going after it, mommy comes in and says, what's this art story? You need to be an accountant. Artists don't make any money. What kind of nonsense is this? And it's totally blocking the choice of becoming an artist. So, Climax now is very emotional for the main character because they have to work through their feelings as well. So, remember when they first encounter the problem. So, when a mother first says this, artist, please, accountant, that's what you're going to do. I'm not spending any money on any art, anything for you. Then the main character should react to that. Is like, what? How come mommy say this? Some kind of reaction. And then she realizes, you know what? Mommy isn't budging. I'm not going to get her blessing. How, how am I going to deal with this? I don't know how to deal with this. And so, she decides she's going to have a little conversation with mommy. And then all she says is that, hey, I really want to do this. And mommy says, what? Are you kidding? And then argument. So the argument now is the climax because in that argument, the mother could say some things and the daughter could say some things. And then during the argument, the girl hears the mother say that, I'm really worried about you. And then she realizes, wait, so mom is saying no because she's worried about me. And then during the argument, the the mom would hear that she could probably actually do this. She's really good. And so that is the turning point. And then because things have changed in that, then at the end of the argument, the mom could say, you know what, I'll give it a chance. And then the daughter would say, yeah, I understand what you're saying. So maybe I could wait a little longer and put some other things in place. That is not the full end of the story. That is just the climax. Because after they say these things, then they have to respond to each other. So when the mom says, okay, I'll give it a chance, and the daughter says, okay, I'll wait a little bit, then how do they react to that? That would be falling action. So there's no rising tension anymore because they've both conceded a little bit, they've both compromised. And that whole process of compromising, which is the argument, is the climax and the turning point of the story. So the daughter is facing the problem and resolving it in terms of the decisions that have to be made. She's resolving it at that point. And then, so afterward, mommy has agreed. I have also agreed to things. Falling action. How do I feel about this? How does mommy feel about this? What do we do after we've made these decisions? How do we interact with each other after we've made these decisions? And then the resolution would be, what lessons have we learned from this entire thing that is going to affect, what lesson have we learned that is going to affect moving forward, right? And so, as you can see, it's a process. The climax is a process. It's not just meeting something, it's a process of making changes. And that's why it is the most exciting part of the story, because it's a very active process of dealing with things. All right. And then, so I'm not going to deal with the boy and the crush. Let's boy and his dog. A boy is playing with his rambunctious dog, Sadie, when she pulls loose from her collar and runs away. Now the boy must find Sadie before she runs too far away to be found. All right, so that's the rising action. We have some conflict happening there. So after looking for Sadie for a while, the boy hears barking from around the house. There he finds his lost dog, and the two happily meet again. So they're looking for a while, and they maybe false leads and all those things, rising action, and then the barking that he hears, that's kind of like the intervention. So what is it that's leading him to face the problem, and then facing the problem of um, getting the dog is the climax. And then when he sees the dog and the dog sees him, getting to the dog, maybe she's stuck in something and he has to like get her out. Maybe she fell into a hole or something. And that process of getting the dog and reuniting with the dog, that is the climax. And then, so what happens after that? That is the turning point. So now that happened, what's going to be falling action? Yes, he's relieved and he's happy to see her, but then he has to get a new color, and maybe a better color, because she pulls loose from this one. So maybe instead of a collar around her neck, he's going to get one of those brace things to put her in so that she wouldn't easily get away. And so there's stuff that happens after climax that make it feel as if that's when the problem is solved. But those are the reactions to solving the problem, really. And climax is the point at which, that turning point, when the problem is actually solved. And so, all right, so that's definition and examples of climax. We had this one already. This one is from Masterclass. This is a website where you can learn all kinds of different things. They have courses on everything from baking, electrical work, whatnot, from industry leaders, people in the field of whatever topic, so community and government, wellness, design and style, arts and entertainment, writing. There's a whole section on writing alone because it's so huge. Sports and gaming, science and tech, music, food, etc., etc. Lots of different things. Business. If you want to learn something, you can come here. It's like a platform with courses, taught by professionals. When I say professionals, you can actually learn about writing scripts and movie storytelling from actual directors. I think there's a course in here about writing. Um, from Stephen King, and so real popular names and faces that we recognize. Now, this one, September 2021. Here is their definition of climax. A climax is a dramatic turning point in a narrative, a pivotal moment at the peak of the story arc that pits the protagonist against an opposing force in order to resolve the main conflict once and for all. The climax is one of the most important literary devices in plot structure. It's the moment when the story arc bends and begins its descent. Let me read that again. The climax is one of the most important literary devices in plot structure. It's the moment when the story arc bends and begins its descent. Now, of course, the solving of the problem is the beginning of the end. We've solved the conflict, and when we solve the conflict, then we can, I guess, resolve the whole situation. So, like, if we go back to that issue with the daughter and the mom, the whole issue is not just that the mother said no to becoming an artist. The whole issue is that the mother doesn't understand the child, what she really needs, and the child doesn't understand the mom and why she's afraid for her to become an artist. And so that is the whole issue. So, what happens when we deal with the biggest problem that's blocking the whole issue? That is when we can start really putting things in place to resolve the whole issue. So, I guess you could look at it like this: the climax resolves the biggest problem, falling action and resolution. That's when we tie up the whole situation and, deal with the loose ends, right? With the boy and his dog, the bigger issue, the whole issue, is that the color didn't work effectively, and that's what led to the problem. So we have the conflict, finding the dog, dealing with that. Once we solve that, then we still have to deal with the other little odds and ends to make sure this thing doesn't happen again, because we learned some lessons the first time. And that's where lessons learned come in, when we use the experience of the story to solve this issue. And so let's see, what else do they say? There's a whole article on the climax. So, in literary terms, the definition of climax is the highest point of tension in a storyline, often depicted by a confrontation between the protagonist and antagonist. A climax resolves the main conflict of the story and is the moment the main character reaches or fails to reach, because, like I said, they don't always have to win. The word climax originates from Greek, and so we have that information there. And then there's a longer article about how it fits in the story. And so you could look it up and read through that if you're so interested. But what I'm sharing it to tell you is this: in all of those that I read, we get some recurring themes and we get some clarification. The climax is when the main character faces the biggest problem. It's not when they first meet it. And the reason I am making that clarification is so that a child writing a story doesn't forget, well, how should I put it? Yeah, I guess I could say it that way. So the child writing the story doesn't forget that characters need to respond to things. So when I meet the biggest problem, as I meet it, I don't solve it. When I meet it, because it's a really big problem and it's surprising to me and it makes me feel stuck, I have to explore some of those feelings, because the only way to get readers to really connect and feel as stuck as the main character is with some descriptions and so on. And that's how the descriptions and character descriptions, setting descriptions, all kinds of things can work into there before we solve the problem. And climax is the facing of it, and the process of solving that biggest conflict. And then when we solve that biggest conflict, now we can relax, react to that point of celebration, etc. And then when we get to the overall story, which would be the, stepping back from the problem and everything, then we can sort of resolve that overall thing that gets to the point where we learn a lesson and we see how this lesson could help us in the future. And we recognize that the experiences of the story led to this lesson. And now we are different people because of this lesson. And what caused us to learn this lesson? The rising action and climax, because that's when things turned for us. And so then we could get the falling action and resolution and, all those other bits of it. So while overall there is a hint at the issue of, okay, what exactly is the resolution? And yeah, we will spend some time on that in the future. I really want you to see it how careful we have to be with the way we describe what climax is and what the falling action is, because it makes a difference in how students respond to these things. Okay. And so that I really wanted to make sure that that was absolutely clear. All right. So now so what are we doing this week? So I did warn ahead of time that we're going to spend a lot of time on climax because of how important I think climax is. So now that we've gotten that and we recognize that it is the turning point and what that turning point actually is, then we can recognize that how can we actually do it. So this week, because of how challenging climax is, what I think is the most useful thing to do this week before we even begin writing about climax, you really want to spend this week doing a lot of reading. So you are looking for short stories and you want to get micro stories, really short stories, because then it would be a lot easier to find and a lot clearer for the child to work with. So you want to find those micro stories, read and identify what is the rising action, what is the climax, what is the falling action, and so you could see where climax fits into a story, how exciting it is supposed to be, and those kinds of things. And you can do a lot of reading, like actual reading in terms of printed words, or you can find YouTube videos with really short stories. You want to get something, I would say 7 minutes or less. If it could be like about maybe 4 or 5 minutes, three even, the shorter the story, the better, right? And so we're working with these really short stories, and you want to get the student to kind of plot it out and identify the climax. What is the turning point? How does that turning point look? What does it look like? What does the character do during the turning point? Now, in describing that turning point, it has to be fairly active, and the focus in that turning point is really the actions of the main character. And so there isn't a whole lot of room in that description of the action and turning point for the you know feelings and character descriptions and all those things, because you really want to focus on the action itself. And so when we do that, that's why we want to spend some time dealing with the character's response to the feelings and so on, and this big problem before we get into the action. And we can do a lot of it after as well. But we want to really get that climax as exciting as possible. So that's what you're checking for. So get a hold of some stories, some videos that you could look at, lots of short stories for kids, micro stories for kids, flash fiction for kids. Look and see, where are these individual things? Where is the climax? Where is, the all these actions and so on. And so that's what you're doing this week. No writing, we're reading, we're viewing, we're really understanding climax. And of course, if you are interested in getting some real clarity on that. Remember, I have the flashcards and the poster, and I have a package with some short stories. Then you can work with that. Working on a new package with five or so just straight stories only. And that's going to be available later on. And in my August program for the narrative writing, let's see, let me share that with you as well. Um, right, so it's very similar to the report writing, and in this one, we'll be working, it's 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. This one is, so the reports are in the morning. This one is 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. With this one, I'll be giving the um, posters and flashcards as um, special gift for when you pay in full, you get that complete. You get that. 12 digital booklets, 7 stories booklets with, again, you get, I think in this one, there are 7 sample stories plus prompts plus a whole lot of other stuff. And that's what we're working with this one. And so the beginning of it, so the post and the flashcards, if you want a copy of that, and you want to get really great value in terms of a program, you would have all of this information that you could work with to support your child. So you're giving them like the best opportunity to clarify these things and get it right so that when they hit standard 5, so it's ideal for students who are in standard 4 now and they're going into standard 5. Um, to really get settled so that when they start drilling and practice tests and all of that, they would have all of these things clear and they'd be able to really practice and develop skills rather than be learning skills when they get into that whole practice mode. And so for a standard 3 student who's going into standard 4, it's going to be a really high level program, but I know there are some students who already have this information. And so they know the basics, but they're still having some issues with it. If you want to give your standard 3 student um, a heads up and, an advantage going into standard 4, then this is an awesome program for them as well. So, and just while I'm here, I am also doing comprehension. So I'll talk about this quickly before we get into the comprehension today. I'm offering comprehension program. And with this one, you're getting the 16 unique practice exercises. So I'm going to be doing, so you have practice exercises for fiction, practice for um, nonfiction, for graphics, and for the poetry. And so we'll be going through in detail how to respond to all of these things. And it's following a similar line of what I'm talking about as we go through the practice and the discussion in these lives. But of course, you get these practice materials. And so awesome value with all of that practice material and so on, and you get answers to them and so on. And of course, if you are interested in getting the practice materials only, those are going to be available from September. So I want to hold out and allow those who are entering the program to be the first to get those materials because those materials will be brand new and allow you to get a head start on comprehension, fill in some gaps if you still have gaps with comprehension, and so on. All right. Okay. So we're finished with the character climax and all of that. I hope going into all the details that I did made some ideas really clear to you. If you're still not sure about climax, send me a message. Um, Go ahead and ask the questions. Tell me exactly what the issue is, what is kind of unclear. And the reason I went into that in so much detail is simply because I know there are textbooks out there that are telling students that the climax is when you meet the problem. Falling action is when you solve the problem. Well, when you get what you need to solve the problem, the resolution is when you solve the problem, and then conclusion comes after that. But I hope what I shared with you today clarified all of that. That's not exactly how it works. It has some of the same components, but that's not exactly how it works. All right. And so with the fiction answers, I'm going to go through this one really quickly because I'm just realizing my time. Remember, I told you climax is a thing for me because I see the issues coming from it. Comprehension, dealing with fiction answers. Now, if you've been following the series, last week we looked at the questions. The week before that, we looked at what fiction is. And so we know that we have a focus on character and all those things. And so what you want to do is to make sure that your student knows how to, um, you have words that they can use to describe personality and all those things. And you want to stick to the point. Um, so if the answer asks for two things, you give two things. If the answer asks for an opinion and then a reason for the opinion, do that. Don't elaborate too much when answering questions. Now, this goes across the board, but specifically with fiction and dealing with responding about personality and characters and how characters feel about each other and those types of things. So, you really want to just kind of zero in on the answer and stick to that. Write it in the briefest way possible. So, be as brief as possible. Focus on what the question asks and always have reasons for your answers. This is how you are going to get the best response to the fiction comprehension. And so that I think, I mean, it's not a whole lot to mention there because again, if you have the past papers, get a copy of those if you don't have it. I have answers if you want to get those. Send me a WhatsApp because the whole idea is that you really want to be reviewing and getting a really clear understanding of how you can answer questions quickly. So a student might know the answer, they might have an idea of the answer, but the way they word it and put it together, that might create a problem for them. And so these are some of the issues that we would be looking at in that comprehension program that I'm doing in August. And I have a document that has I think I'm up to, I think it's like 125 different words that students can use to describe personality and then categories. So somebody who is always happy, we have a list for that. Somebody who is being mean and disruptive, we have a list for that. And so there are different categories that students can be able to recognize how to answer questions about characters, what words they can choose because we want to use words more than happy and excited. We want to show real understanding of the personality by using more sophisticated kind of words. And so getting a copy of that would be a good idea, but um I'm making all those materials available within the cost for the comprehension program. So you'd be able to get all of those. So I have a list for words that describe mood, um, and you can use that. So mood, personality, and then of course, as we discuss, we will be talking and I will be showing students how to write answers to the different types of questions. So in your case, this week, you are reviewing answers. So the child isn't necessarily reading and responding to. What you want to be doing is reviewing questions and answers and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Why does this answer make more sense? Why does this answer present itself as the best one to work with? And so that's the kind of thing you want to do. So you're not actually having them answer questions yet. You want to have them first review questions and answers. And then after they have analyzed the answers a little bit, then you give them a worksheet to answer the questions, and then you can compare their answers to recorded answers and see how they match up. And you can look at how the wording is shown and so on. So you want to start them off by reviewing some answers already provided, then work on how they can put things together. And then finally, you give them a worksheet. Remember, we're doing 3 touch points, right? Finally, give them a worksheet. All right. So today's session went on a bit longer than I originally planned because of that whole deep dive into Climax, but I hope it was helpful. So please let me know. Did I clarify things or did I add to the confusion? I really want to know that you understand Climax and it is absolutely clear to you. And of course, feel free to share this information with other parents, with other teachers, let them know about the live that they can join in. If they can't join in live, then of course they can um, look at the replay. The recordings are all on YouTube. You can also find them on my website. And at any point in time, WhatsApp a question. Let me just put up my WhatsApp number just in case um, you don't already know it. And yeah, feel free to send me questions. Another thing is if you're looking for a particular kind of worksheets and you're not finding any, or you've already used out those that you have, let me know what kind of worksheets you need, because I'm going to be spending my July creating worksheets and creating materials so that come September, um, I would be able to share a lot more with you, practical activities and so on that you could work with. All right, so that is the end of our session today. And I am going to play, this is for episode 9. I'm going to play the exit. Um, but I realized in my focus heavily on Climax, I left it up saying episode 8, but it is actually for episode 9. So thank you so much for those of you who were able to stick it out. I know I kind of rambled a little bit where the climax was concerned, but I needed to get into those kinds of details to really share that with you. Send me questions. Thank you for your time. If you're looking at the replay, absolutely appreciate you. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I shall see you next week for episode 10. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.